You are not authorized to be here. Get off this aircraft immediately!
I believe I am.
The slap echoed through the private jet before anyone had time to breathe. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. A leather briefcase crashed onto the polished aisle, papers spilling across the carpet, as a flight attendant folded her arms and looked down with open contempt. "You don't belong on this aircraft," Rebecca Collins said loud enough for everyone to hear. "People like you always end up in the wrong place." The man she had just struck did not move. Benjamin Carter slowly lifted his eyes from the scattered documents. His cheek had turned red, but his expression stayed calm. He reached for a single sheet of paper without rushing, almost as if the silence around him mattered more than the pain. Several passengers stared in disbelief. A retired judge sitting near the front removed his glasses. A middle-aged couple exchanged uneasy looks. Someone quietly unlocked a phone and started recording. No one stepped forward. Rebecca took that silence for support. She pointed toward the open cabin door. "You have one chance. Walk off this airplane before airport police drag you out." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment. His breathing remained steady. "I paid for this flight," he answered quietly. Rebecca laughed. "No, someone like you could never afford this aircraft." The words settled over the cabin like heavy smoke. No one knew that within the next hour those same words would destroy careers, expose years of hidden discrimination, and force one of the largest private aviation companies in America into a public crisis. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected across the sleek white fuselage parked on the executive ramp at Dallas Love Field. Ground crews moved with practiced precision. Luxury vehicles arrived and departed without attracting attention. Wealth often preferred privacy, and private aviation was built on that promise. Inside the cabin, however, dignity had already been broken. Benjamin Carter was 54 years old. His navy jacket showed faint signs of wear around the cuffs. His shoes were polished but old. He carried no expensive watch, no designer luggage, no obvious symbol of wealth. To strangers, he looked like a quiet businessman who had spent more time working than impressing people. That appearance had become strangely useful over the years. Benjamin had learned that people revealed their true character long before they learned his name. He never interrupted. He never corrected assumptions. He simply watched. Across the aisle, a young financial consultant named Emily Parker tightened her grip on her tablet. She had boarded only minutes earlier for what she believed would be another routine business flight. Instead, she found herself watching something that made her stomach twist. Rebecca had not asked for identification. She had not checked the passenger manifest. She had barely glanced at Benjamin's boarding confirmation before deciding he did not belong. Emily looked around the cabin, hoping another passenger would say something. No one did. The silence felt heavier than the accusation itself. Rebecca bent down, grabbed Benjamin's briefcase with one hand and shoved it farther down the aisle. "You are delaying everyone." Benjamin slowly stood. He was taller than most people expected, though his posture remained relaxed. "I would appreciate it," he said evenly, "if you stopped touching my property." Rebecca stepped closer until only inches separated them. Her smile disappeared. "What are you going to do about it?" For the first time, the passengers noticed something unusual. Benjamin was not afraid. He was not angry either. His face carried the quiet patience of someone who had already reached a decision long before anyone else realized a decision needed to be made. Near the cockpit door, Captain Michael Turner watched the exchange through the partially opened flight deck entrance. Years of flying had taught him to recognize conflict before it became dangerous. Something about the man's composure caught his attention immediately. People who were embarrassed usually apologized. People who were guilty usually argued. Benjamin did neither. Instead, he glanced once toward the small security camera mounted above the cabin entrance. Just once. Then he looked back at Rebecca. His voice remained almost gentle. "I hope that camera has been recording since I boarded." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "It records everything." Benjamin nodded. "Good. Only one word. Quiet. Controlled. Certain." Emily felt a travel down her spine. She had no idea who Benjamin Carter really was, but for the first time since boarding, she was absolutely certain that Rebecca Collins had just made the biggest mistake of her entire career. Benjamin did not take another step. The quiet confidence in his face unsettled more people than any angry reaction could have. Rebecca expected excuses. She expected fear. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who seemed completely at peace inside the storm she had created. The cabin remained silent. Even the soft hum of the engines preparing for departure seemed louder now. Emily Parker lowered her tablet. She looked from Benjamin to Rebecca, then toward the captain. Years working in corporate finance had taught her to recognize executives under pressure. They rarely wasted words. They measured every response. Benjamin reminded her of those people. Rebecca folded her arms tighter. "You still haven't answered my question." Benjamin met her eyes. "What question?" "What are you doing on this airplane?" he answered without hesitation. "I have business in New York." She shook her head. "Not on this flight." Benjamin glanced toward the window where the afternoon sunlight reflected across another private aircraft parked nearby. "I believe you're mistaken," Rebecca let out a short laugh. "Mistaken? I've worked private aviation for almost 15 years. I know exactly who belongs here." The words landed heavily. An older gentleman sitting across the aisle slowly looked down at his newspaper again. He had witnessed enough moments in life to recognize when pride was replacing judgment. Benjamin noticed him. He also noticed the young baggage supervisor outside the window, looking nervously toward the cabin through the open aircraft door. News traveled quickly on executive ramps. Raised voices attracted attention. Still, Benjamin stayed calm. His thoughts drifted somewhere else. Nearly 30 years earlier, he had stood outside another office wearing an inexpensive suit. A receptionist had refused to let him inside because she assumed he was delivering packages instead of attending an investment meeting. That afternoon had changed his life. He had promised himself something very simple: never become bitter, never forget what it felt like, and never judge another human being by appearance. Success had given him money. That promise had given him peace. Rebecca interrupted the silence. "If you don't leave voluntarily, airport police will escort you off." Benjamin nodded once. "That is certainly your right. If I am trespassing," Emily frowned. The wording caught her attention. "If I am trespassing. Not if you think I am, not if you believe I do not belong." His words sounded careful, almost legal. Captain Michael Turner finally stepped forward from the cockpit. His voice remained professional. "Rebecca." She turned immediately. "Captain, this passenger refuses to cooperate." Michael looked toward Benjamin. "Sir, may I see your boarding confirmation?" Benjamin reached into his jacket and handed over his phone. Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically. He probably made a fake reservation. The comment drew uncomfortable expressions from several passengers. Captain Turner ignored her. He studied the confirmation for several seconds. Then he looked again. His forehead tightened. Reservation looked legitimate, very legitimate. The flight number matched. The aircraft registration matched. The passenger information matched. Only one detail surprised him. The reservation had been approved directly through executive operations instead of standard charter services. That almost never happened. Michael looked back at Benjamin. "May I verify this with dispatch?" Benjamin smiled politely. "Of course." Rebecca threw up both hands. "We're benching everyone softly." "No, only yours." For the first time, Rebecca's confidence cracked, only slightly, just enough for Emily to notice. A faint line appeared between Rebecca's eyebrows. She had expected an emotional argument. Instead, she faced someone who remained completely composed while every fact was being checked. Captain Turner walked several steps toward the cockpit with Benjamin's reservation still open on the screen. Before entering, he quietly instructed the first officer to contact executive operations. No assumptions, no shortcuts, just verification. That was company policy. Emily watched Benjamin return to his seat without being asked. He carefully gathered every paper Rebecca had scattered across the aisle. One page contained sketches for what looked like a community redevelopment project. Another listed scholarship funding. There were no luxury purchases, no extravagant expenses, only plans for schools, housing, and veteran employment programs. Emily blinked. This was not what she expected from someone flying on a private jet. Benjamin noticed her looking. He simply smiled. She hesitated before answering. "You didn't make the mess." Their eyes met for only a second. It was enough. Emily realized something that would stay with her for years. Real dignity rarely announced itself. It revealed itself quietly when someone had every reason to lose control but chose respect instead. Near the cockpit door, Captain Turner listened as Executive Operations answered the secured line. His expression changed almost immediately. His shoulders straightened. He asked the representative to repeat the information. Then he looked through the open cockpit doorway toward Benjamin Carter. A slow silence settled over his face. Rebecca noticed it. What did they say? Michael did not answer. He kept listening. His grip tightened around the phone. The color slowly drained from his face as the truth began unfolding, one careful sentence at a time. Captain Michael Turner lowered the phone slowly, but he did not return it to his pocket. He simply stood there, staring across the cabin at Benjamin Carter, as if he had suddenly realized he had been looking at the wrong man all along. Rebecca took a step toward him. Well, Michael remained silent. Captain, what did Executive Operations say? He inhaled deeply before answering. They confirmed the reservation. Rebecca shrugged. I told you someone probably booked him a seat. Michael looked directly at her. No. Just one word. Firm. Measured. They confirmed much more than that. The atmosphere inside the cabin changed without anyone moving. Passengers leaned forward almost instinctively. Even the young line technician standing outside the aircraft noticed Captain Turner's expression through the open doorway and stopped walking. Rebecca forced at a smile. What does that even mean? Michael chose his words carefully. It means Executive Operations instructed me not to continue this discussion until they arrive. Rebecca laughed again, but this time it sounded thinner. They're sending someone because of him. They're already on their way. Emily Parker watched Benjamin. Nothing about his posture changed. He remained seated, calmly organizing his documents into neat folders. No triumph, no arrogance, no attempt to embarrass anyone. Only patience. That unsettled her even more. Most people wanted revenge after being humiliated. Benjamin seemed interested only in letting the truth arrive on its own. Rebecca pointed toward him again. This is ridiculous. Since when do we delay departures because one passenger complains? Benjamin quietly corrected her. I haven't complained. She froze for a moment. He was right. He had never raised his voice. He had never demanded anyone lose their job. He had never threatened a lawsuit. Everything happening now had begun because company procedures required verification. Nothing more, nothing less. Captain Turner glanced toward the security camera above the entryway. Rebecca, she looked at him. Did you make physical contact with Mr. Carter? Her confidence returned immediately. I guided him away from the aisle. Several passengers exchanged looks. Emily lowered her eyes. Everyone in the cabin knew that was not what had happened. The retired judge folded his newspaper and finally spoke. I have practiced law for over 40 years. His voice was calm. I suggest everyone choose their words carefully. Silence followed. Rebecca's face tightened. She realized how people were no longer looking at Benjamin. They were looking at her. Outside, 2 black executive vehicles turned onto the private aviation ramp. They were moving faster than normal airport traffic. The line technician noticed them first. He reached for his radio. Within moments, several ground employees quietly gathered near the aircraft without entering. Something unusual was happening. Inside the cabin, Benjamin zipped his briefcase closed. Emily could not stop herself. Mr. Carter. He looked up. May I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you tell everyone who you are? Benjamin smiled gently. Would it have changed how I was treated? Emily opened her mouth, then stopped, because she already knew the answer. Yes, it absolutely would. Benjamin nodded as if he had heard the thought she never spoke. That's exactly why. His voice carried no bitterness. Respect that depends on a title isn't respect. The retired judge smiled quietly. Young lady, he said to Emily, remember those words. She did. Years later, she would still remember them exactly. Rebecca shook her head impatiently. Oh, please. She looked directly at Benjamin. You're acting like some important executive. Benjamin answered with complete sincerity. I never said it wasn't. For the first time since boarding, Rebecca had no reply. Captain Turner felt his phone vibrate again. He answered immediately. Yes, his expression became even more serious. I understand. He ended the call and walked toward Benjamin. Every eye followed him. When he stopped, he spoke with unmistakable respect. Mr. Carter, Executive Operations, has asked me to apologize for the delay. Benjamin gave a small nod. Thank you, Captain. They've also requested that no one leave the aircraft until their representatives arrive. This is insane. Captain Turner turned toward her. No, his voice remained steady. This is procedure. What procedure? The procedure that applies when executive ownership is involved. The word struck the cabin like thunder. Executive ownership. Passengers looked from the captain to Benjamin, then back again. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. She remembered the reservation approved through executive operations. She remembered Benjamin's calm confidence. She remembered him looking at the security camera instead of arguing. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Rebecca forced a nervous laugh. You can't seriously believe he owns this jet? Captain Turner did not answer. He simply looked toward the aircraft door. Footsteps echoed up the boarding stairs. Slow, deliberate. A sharply dressed woman carrying a leather portfolio entered the cabin, followed by 2 members of the company's executive security team. She looked directly at Benjamin before acknowledging anyone else. Her expression softened immediately. Good afternoon, Mr. Carter. The cabin fell completely silent. Then she added the sentence that made every person on board stop breathing. I am deeply sorry for what happened aboard your aircraft. Rebecca Collins stood perfectly still. The confidence that had carried her through the last several minutes disappeared from her face. She looked at Benjamin, then at the executive representative, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate misunderstanding. There has to be a mistake, she said quietly. The woman walked directly toward Benjamin and extended her hand. My name is Laura Mitchell, Senior Vice President of Executive Operations. Mr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for the way you have been treated. Benjamin stood and shook her hand politely. Thank you for coming so quickly. It was the least we could do. No one in the cabin spoke. The silence was almost painful. Laura turned toward Captain Turner. Captain, has the security footage been preserved? Yes, ma'am. Has the aircraft remained secured since the incident? Yes, she nodded. Good. Everything she asked sounded procedural, calm, professional. There was no anger in her voice, only responsibility. Rebecca finally found her words. I was only enforcing company policy. Laura looked at her. Which policy? Rebecca hesitated. I believed he wasn't authorized to board. Did you verify the passenger manifest? No. Did you contact dispatch before confronting him? No. Did you request assistance from the captain? Rebecca swallowed. No. Laura paused for a moment. Then you were not enforcing company policy. The words landed harder than a shout. You were acting on your own assumptions. Rebecca's breathing became uneven. I was trying to protect the aircraft, Laura answered immediately. Our company protects aircraft by following procedures. We do not replace procedures with personal judgment. Emily watched Rebecca's shoulders sink. For the first time, the flight attendant looked less defensive than frightened. Benjamin quietly closed his briefcase. Laura, she turned. Yes, sir. I'd like everyone to remember something. The entire cabin looked toward him. This conversation isn't about a private jet. No one interrupted. It's about what happens when we decide who deserves respect before we know who they are. His voice remained calm. I could have been the owner. He looked toward the passengers. I could have been a guest. He glanced toward the line technician outside. I could have been a mechanic finishing a shift. Then he looked back at Rebecca. It shouldn't matter. Emily felt those words settle deep inside her. The retired judge slowly nodded. That is exactly right. Laura remained silent for a moment before speaking again. Mr. Carter, executive leadership has requested that this aircraft remain on the ground until a full preliminary review is completed. Benjamin asked only one question. Has another crew been contacted? Yes, they're already on their way. He nodded. Good. Rebecca stared at him. You still intend for this flight to continue? Benjamin looked with surprising kindness. There are passengers on board with families waiting. She blinked. I won't punish innocent people for someone else's decision. The statement caught everyone off guard. Emily expected anger. Instead, she saw restraint. The older couple near the front exchanged relieved smiles. One of them whispered, That says everything about the man. Outside, more airport personnel gathered near the aircraft, careful to remain behind the designated security line. News had already begun spreading across the executive terminal. Something serious had happened aboard one of the company's flagship aircraft. Laura opened her portfolio. Rebecca Collins. Rebecca looked up. Effective immediately. I am relieving you of all flight duties pending investigation. Rebecca's face turned pale. Laura answered without emotion. Under company policy, I can. I've worked here for almost 15 years. I understand. I've never been written up. I understand. I was only trying to, Laura gently interrupted. The investigation will determine exactly what happened. Rebecca's eyes shifted toward Benjamin. For several long seconds she said nothing. Then, almost reluctantly, she spoke. If I misunderstood, Benjamin did not let her finish. This is bigger than a misunderstanding. His tone stayed respectful. You didn't ask a single question before deciding who I was. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Benjamin continued. That can happen to anyone. He looked around the cabin again. Not just people with money. His words reminded several passengers of moments from their own lives. A veteran remembered being ignored because of worn clothes after returning from service. An elderly woman remembered being followed through a department store because someone assumed she intended to steal. Emily remembered interviewing brilliant job candidates who had almost been rejected because they did not fit someone's image of success. The cabin had become something different. It no longer felt like the scene of an argument. It felt like a mirror. Laura quietly handed Rebecca a company identification envelope. I'll ask security to escort you to the terminal. Rebecca accepted it with trembling hands. As she slowly walked toward the aircraft door, no one celebrated, no one applauded. Benjamin simply watched her leave. His face showed neither satisfaction nor revenge, only disappointment, because he understood something many people never learned. The deepest damage was not caused by one slap. It was caused by the habit of judging another human being before giving them the chance to speak. Rebecca disappeared down the boarding stairs without looking back. The aircraft door closed behind her with a dull, metallic sound that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence was no longer filled with tension. It was filled with reflection. Laura Mitchell turned toward the passengers. On behalf of our company, I apologize to every one of you for what you witnessed today. This behavior does not represent the standards we expect from our employees. Several passengers nodded. An elderly woman sitting near the window quietly wiped away a tear. I've traveled for almost 40 years, she said softly. I've seen people judged because of their clothes, their age, and the color of their skin. I never thought I'd watch it happen on a private flight. Benjamin looked at her. I'm sorry you had to. She smiled sadly. I'm more sorry that you did. Captain Turner stepped forward. Mr. Carter, I also owe you an apology. Benjamin shook his head. You followed procedure once you became aware of the situation. I should have stepped in sooner. Benjamin paused before answering. Leadership isn't about never making mistakes. The captain listened carefully. It's about recognizing them before they become habits. Michael lowered his eyes for a moment. I'll remember that. Outside the aircraft, airport security officers remained nearby, but none entered the cabin. The situation had become an internal corporate investigation rather than a criminal emergency, because Benjamin had not requested immediate law enforcement action. Everyone understood that the next steps would follow company policy and established legal procedures. Laura opened another folder. Mr. Carter, our legal department recommends documenting your statement while events are still fresh. Benjamin nodded. That's reasonable. She handed him a simple witness form. He looked at it for only a moment before setting it back on the table between them. Then he added something unexpected. I'd also like every passenger who witnessed this to have the opportunity to submit their own statement. Laura looked surprised, even if their accounts differ from yours, especially if they differ. Emily looked up immediately. Benjamin noticed. The truth doesn't become stronger because only one person tells it. Laura slowly smiled. I understand. The retired judge quietly laughed. I wish more people in court believed that. Several passengers relaxed for the first time since boarding. The emotional pressure inside that cabin began to ease, replaced by thoughtful conversation. Emily walked toward Benjamin. I owe you an apology too. He looked genuinely confused. For what? I saw everything happen, she hesitated. I knew it was wrong. She looked toward the floor. But I didn't say anything. You weren't the only one. No, but that doesn't make it easier. Benjamin nodded. It shouldn't. Emily took a slow breath. My father used to tell me that silence protects the wrong person more often than the right one. Benjamin smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He was. She glanced toward the closed aircraft door. I don't think I'll stay silent again. Benjamin extended his hand. Then something good came out of today. She shook it. Nearby, Captain Turner received another message from operations. The replacement cabin crew has arrived. Laura looked toward Benjamin. They can have us ready for departure within about 30 minutes. Benjamin checked his watch. We'll wait. Laura blinked. Sir, there is no need for you to delay further, there is. He looked around the cabin. They deserve to board this flight without carrying the memory of what just happened. Laura understood immediately. He was not talking about schedules. He was talking about trust. A few minutes later, 3 new flight attendants entered the aircraft. Their lead attendant, Susan Reynolds, greeted every passenger personally before saying anything else. She stopped in front of Benjamin. He stood politely. I've been briefed. She looked him directly in the eyes. I cannot erase what happened. No. But I promise every passenger on this flight will be treated with dignity from this moment forward. Benjamin nodded once. That's all anyone should expect. The simple exchange changed the mood inside the cabin. Passengers smiled. People began helping each other return bags to the overhead compartments. The older gentleman folded a blanket for the woman beside him. Emily helped organize the papers that had earlier been scattered across the aisle. Small acts, quiet acts, the kind that reminded everyone how quickly respect could rebuild what prejudice had damaged. As the cabin settled, Laura received one final call. She listened carefully, thanked the caller, and slipped the phone into her jacket. She walked back toward Benjamin. There is one more matter. He looked at her. Our board chairman has requested an emergency meeting tonight. Benjamin waited. They would like you to attend. He already knew why. The incident was no longer about one employee. It had become a question about the culture inside the company he had spent decades building. Benjamin looked once around the peaceful cabin. Then out through the window at the setting Texas sun. His voice was quiet. If this happened in front of me, I have to ask myself how many times it happened when I wasn't here to see it. No one answered, because everyone on board knew the same thought had already crossed their own minds. The aircraft finally pushed back from the terminal, just as the evening sky began turning shades of orange and deep blue. The engines came alive with a steady roar, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained unusually quiet. Every passenger carried the memory of what had happened only an hour earlier. Benjamin sat by the window, watching the lights of Dallas slowly drift away beneath the wing. He was not thinking about Rebecca. He was thinking about responsibility. Owning a company had never meant controlling every decision. It meant creating a culture where the right decisions became natural. Somewhere along the way, something inside that culture had failed. Across the aisle, Emily kept replaying the afternoon in her mind. She finally leaned toward Benjamin. May I ask one more question? He smiled. You've earned that. If nobody had recognized you today, what would you have done? Benjamin looked out the window for another moment. The same thing. You wouldn't have revealed who you were. Not unless I had to. Emily frowned. Why? Because the problem wasn't about me. She listened carefully. If respect only appears after someone learns your title, then respect was never there in the first place. Emily slowly nodded. Those words stayed with her. Captain Turner stepped into the cabin after the aircraft reached cruising altitude. He stopped beside Benjamin's seat. I've received another report from Executive Operations. Benjamin looked up. The security footage has already been copied. Laura Mitchell had worked quickly. So has every passenger statement. Benjamin glanced around the cabin. How many? Every passenger chose to submit one. Emily smiled quietly. The retired judge raised his coffee cup. I figured the truth deserved more than one witness. A few passengers laughed softly. The tension eased for the first time all day. Captain Turner lowered his voice. There is something else. Benjamin noticed the concern in his face. What is it? The review team has already begun looking through previous employee complaints. Benjamin's expression remained calm, and there appear to be several incidents involving Rebecca Collins. Emily looked surprised. Several? Michael nodded. Some involved customer treatment. He paused. Others involved employees reporting similar concerns. The cabin grew quiet again. Benjamin folded his hands together. Were they investigated? Captain Turner hesitated. They were documented. Benjamin understood the difference immediately. Documented, not resolved, not corrected, simply filed away. That single distinction explained more than a lengthy report ever could. Benjamin sighed softly. A complaint ignored becomes permission. Captain Turner looked at him. I never thought about it that way, Benjamin answered gently. Neither do most organizations. Laura Mitchell called through the aircraft satellite phone a few minutes later. Captain Turner placed the call on the secure cabin handset. Mr. Carter, I'm here. The chairman has expanded tonight's meeting. Benjamin waited. Every member of the board will attend. I expected that. There is pressure from outside counsel to suspend several senior managers pending investigation. Benjamin remained silent. Laura continued. They're worried this incident may reflect a larger leadership failure. Benjamin closed his eyes briefly. It probably does. Emily could hear only Benjamin's side of the conversation, but each answer made her realize how differently he approached power. No excuses, no protecting reputations, only accountability. After ending the call, Benjamin returned the handset to Captain Turner. The captain spoke carefully. Most executives would already be talking about lawsuits. Benjamin smiled faintly. Lawsuits solve legal problems. And this? This is a human problem. Captain Turner nodded slowly. Benjamin continued. So do cameras. So do investigations. He looked across the peaceful cabin. But none of those matter if people stop seeing each other as human beings. The older woman near the front quietly whispered to her husband. That's the first executive I've ever heard say that. The husband smiled. Maybe that's why he owns the company. Several hours passed peacefully. Passengers talked with one another like old friends instead of strangers. Coffee was served. Dinner arrived. Susan Reynolds checked on every traveler personally, treating each conversation with genuine warmth. No one was rushed. No one was overlooked. The difference was impossible to ignore. Emily watched Susan stop to help the elderly woman fold her blanket before kneeling beside another passenger to explain a meal option with patience and respect. It was ordinary service. But after what everyone had witnessed earlier, ordinary kindness felt extraordinary. Benjamin noticed it too. When Susan reached his seat, he thanked her. She smiled. I'm only doing my job. Benjamin shook his head. No. She looked confused. You're reminding everyone what this job is supposed to look like. Her eyes became slightly wet. No one has ever thanked me like that, Benjamin answered quietly. They should. The aircraft continued east through the darkening sky. Far below, cities shimmered like scattered stars. Far ahead, New York waited. So did the emergency board meeting. Benjamin knew difficult decisions were coming. Some careers would end. Policies would change. Investigations would begin. But sitting in the quiet cabin, surrounded by strangers who now spoke to one another with unexpected warmth, he realized something even more important. Real leadership did not begin inside a boardroom. It began in the ordinary moments when one person chose dignity over assumption, respect over appearance, and courage over silence. The aircraft touched down in New York just before nightfall. Rain streaked across the cabin windows as the wheels rolled onto the runway. The passengers remained seated, but no one reached for a phone or hurried to stand. The quiet respect that had slowly grown during the flight stayed with them until the very end. When the cabin door opened, Laura Mitchell was already waiting on the jet bridge with several members of the executive legal team. Benjamin stepped off the aircraft carrying the same worn briefcase he had boarded with that morning. Laura walked beside him. The board is assembled. Benjamin nodded. Have they reviewed the footage? They've watched it twice. And the witness statements? Everyone. Laura hesitated. There wasn't a single statement supporting Rebecca's version. Benjamin remained silent. The group walked through the private terminal under bright white lights. Employees along the hallway quietly stepped aside as Benjamin passed. Some recognized him immediately. Others only sensed that something significant had happened. Inside the executive conference room, 12 board members were already seated around a long walnut table. No one was talking. The security video was frozen on the large screen at the front of the room. It showed Rebecca's hand striking Benjamin's face. The room felt heavy. Board chairman Richard Sullivan stood as Benjamin entered. He was an older man with decades of experience leading American corporations. I'm sorry, those were his first words. I failed to recognize a problem inside our own company. Benjamin took his seat. This isn't about one mistake. Richard nodded. I agree. Laura distributed printed reports to everyone. The room remained quiet as Padge turned. Customer complaints, employee interviews, internal emails, training records, everything had been gathered within hours. Finally, the company's general counsel spoke. We have identified several previous complaints involving Rebecca Collins. He paused. None resulted in formal disciplinary action. Benjamin looked across the table. Why? No one answered immediately. The vice president of human resources cleared her throat. The complaints were reviewed individually. Benjamin waited. We never examined them together. Benjamin leaned back. That was the mistake. Several board members looked confused. He continued. One complaint may describe one employee. He tapped the stack of reports. Several complaints often describe a culture. Silence returned. The words settled over the room. Richard slowly removed his glasses. I should have asked harder questions. Benjamin looked at him. We all should have. There is another, spoke, issue. Benjamin nodded. The security department reviewed additional cabin footage from previous flights. And there are other situations where passengers were spoken to disrespectfully. Were they physical? Humiliating? Yes, Benjamin closed the folder. The room understood his disappointment. He had spent decades building a company around trust, professionalism, and discretion. Yet somewhere beneath polished marketing and financial success, something had quietly drifted away from those values. Laura broke the silence. The media has not learned about today's incident. Benjamin looked toward her. They will. Several board members exchanged nervous looks. Richard frowned. We may still contain this. Benjamin shook his head. No, you don't want to. No, the chairman looked surprised. Benjamin spoke calmly. If people lose trust because we tell the truth, then we never deserved their trust. No one argued. The oldest board member quietly smiled. I remember when companies believed that. Benjamin continued, we will release the facts, the investigation, the corrective actions, and the apology. The head of communications looked uncertain. Publicly? Yes. What if it damages the company? Benjamin answered without hesitation. Hiding the truth damages it more. Across the table, the human resources vice president slowly nodded. I think our employees need to hear that as much as the public does. The meeting continued late into the evening. Policy pleas were reviewed. Training standards were questioned. Reporting procedures were rewritten. Benjamin listened far more than he spoke. Every decision returned to the same principle. Respect could never depend on appearance. Near the end of the meeting, Laura entered with another folder. There is one final matter. She handed it to Benjamin. Inside were handwritten letters. From the passengers. Emily had written about remaining silent and regretting it. The retired judge had written that justice began with ordinary people telling the truth. The elderly woman thanked Benjamin for reminding everyone that dignity was not earned by wealth. Benjamin finished reading the last page. He smiled softly. Then he looked around the room. He gently placed the letters on the table. This is what matters. The board members looked at the pages. They're not talking about a slap. They're talking about how people deserve to be treated. Richard slowly stood again. What do you want this company to become after today? Benjamin looked through the rain-covered windows toward the lights of Manhattan. His answer came quietly. I don't want people to remember the incident. He paused. I want them to remember what we chose to become because of it. No one spoke after that, because every person in the room understood that the hardest work was only beginning. The investigation had uncovered one painful truth. Now they had to prove they were willing to change it. The company's public statement was released before sunrise the next morning. It did not hide behind legal language. It did not minimize what had happened. It described the incident, confirmed that an internal investigation had begun, apologized to the passengers, and promised that the findings would be made public. Within hours, every major business newsroom had picked up the story. The headlines were not about a billionaire. They were about respect. Morning television programs discussed workplace bias. Radio hosts asked listeners to share moments when they had been judged before speaking a single word. Social media filled with stories from veterans, teachers, nurses, construction workers, and retirees who had all experienced the same quiet humiliation at some point in their lives. The conversation had become much larger than one private flight. Benjamin watched the news from his office overlooking Manhattan. He muted the television. He had no interest in watching his own story become entertainment. Laura Mitchell entered carrying another stack of reports. Our employee hotline has received hundreds of messages. Benjamin looked up. Complaints? Some. She smiled slightly. Most are people thanking the company for admitting a mistake instead of hiding it. Benjamin nodded. Trust begins with honesty. Laura placed another folder on his desk. There are also letters from employees. Benjamin opened the first one. A baggage handler wrote that he had often watched passengers ignore mechanics and ground crews as though they were invisible. A customer service representative admitted she had sometimes stayed silent when co-workers treated customers unfairly because she feared retaliation. A young flight attendant wrote that she wanted to build a career where kindness mattered more than appearances. Benjamin read every letter, slowly, carefully. He understood that culture was changing one conversation at a time. Across town, Rebecca Collins sat inside the office of her attorney. She looked exhausted. The confidence she had shown on the aircraft was gone. Her lawyer slid a copy of the investigation summary across the table. The video is clear. Rebecca lowered her eyes. I know, there are also multiple witnesses. I know. He spoke gently. This isn't only about striking a passenger. Rebecca remained silent. It's about the assumptions you made before that. For the first time since the incident, Rebecca whispered the words she had refused to say. I judged him. The lawyer nodded. Yes, she covered her face with both hands. I didn't even ask his name. Those words hurt more than anything else. Not because of the investigation, because she finally understood the choice she had made before every other mistake followed. Back at headquarters, Benjamin met with department leaders from every division. Pilots, flight attendants, maintenance supervisors, customer service managers. No cameras, no reporters, only honest discussion. He stood at the front of the room without a prepared speech. I don't want anyone here to defend what happened. The room stayed quiet. I also don't want anyone pretending this could never happen again. Several people slowly nodded. Benjamin looked around the room. If we're only looking for one person to blame, we'll miss the reason it happened. A maintenance supervisor raised his hand. What do we change first? Benjamin answered immediately. We teach people to slow down. The room looked puzzled, he continued. Bias happens quickly. Respect takes a moment longer. He paused. That moment can change someone's life. Emily Parker had accepted an invitation to attend the meeting as a passenger representative. She stood near the back, listening. When Benjamin invited questions, she slowly stood. I have one. Everyone turned toward her. What should ordinary people do when they witness something like this? Benjamin smiled. The same thing I hope leaders do. She waited. Speak. He looked around the room. Respect grows when good people refuse to outsource courage. The sentence settled over everyone. Several managers quietly wrote it down. Late that afternoon, Laura entered with one final update. The investigation is complete. Benjamin looked toward her. The review panel unanimously recommends terminating Rebecca Collins. He nodded slowly. And the managers who ignored previous complaints, they're being removed from leadership pending further review. Benjamin, the file. No exceptions. There won't be. Outside the conference room windows, the city moved as it always had. People hurried through crosswalks. Taxi horns echoed below. Life continued. Inside the building, however, something had shifted. The company had stopped asking how one employee failed. It had started asking how everyone could do better. Benjamin stood and looked across the room. No policy can force compassion, he spoke quietly. No handbook can manufacture respect. He placed his hand on the investigation report one last time. But every one of us decides, every single day, whether another human being will leave our presence feeling smaller or feeling no one applauded. No one needed to. But because everyone in that room understood that the future of the company would not be determined by a single public statement. It would be determined by thousands of ordinary moments that no camera would ever record. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the turning of a single page. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long beams across polished wooden benches where reporters, employees, and members of the public waited in silence. Benjamin Carter sat near the front without a team of photographers surrounding him. He had been asked many times to make public appearances since the incident. He had refused almost all of them. Today, he was present for one reason only: to tell the truth. Rebecca Collins entered with her attorney. She looked different from the woman who had stood in the aircraft doorway weeks earlier. The sharp confidence had disappeared. Her shoulders were lower. Her eyes rarely lifted from the floor. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully. Security footage, passenger statements, company investigation records, medical photographs showing the redness on Benjamin's face immediately after the slap. Every piece fit together. Nothing had been exaggerated. Nothing had been hidden. When Benjamin was called to testify, he walked calmly to the witness stand. The attorney asked the first question, "Mr. Carter, why did you choose to file this civil action?" Benjamin answered without hesitation, "I didn't file it to punish someone." The courtroom became even quieter. "I filed it because actions have consequences." The attorney nodded. "Did your position as owner influence your decision?" Benjamin looked toward the jury. "No, my responsibility did." He explained how the incident revealed weaknesses inside the company's culture. He described the ignored complaints, the missing accountability, the need for meaningful change instead of private settlements. His testimony lasted less than an hour. Not once did he insult Rebecca. Not once did he question her character beyond the actions supported by evidence. That restraint impressed everyone in the courtroom. When Rebecca testified, her voice trembled. She admitted she had never verified Benjamin's identity. She admitted she had pushed his briefcase. She admitted she had slapped him. Then she stopped speaking for several seconds. Finally, she looked toward Benjamin. "I thought I knew who you were," Benjamin answered quietly from the witness stand. "No, you thought you knew what I was worth." The words hung in the room. Rebecca slowly nodded. "You're right." Several jurors lowered their eyes. The case ended more quickly than many expected. The evidence left little room for dispute. The court found Rebecca responsible for assault and awarded damages consistent with the evidence presented. The amount itself mattered far less than the written opinion issued by the judge. The opinion emphasized that every individual deserved equal dignity regardless of appearance, occupation, or perceived social status. It also praised the company's decision to preserve evidence, cooperate fully, and reform its internal practices instead of obstructing the investigation. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed forward. Microphones filled the sidewalk. One journalist had called out, "Mr. Carter, do you feel you won today?" Benjamin stopped walking. He looked around at anyone won. The reporters fell silent. A woman lost her career. A company lost part of the public's trust. A group of passengers lost the peaceful flight they deserved. He paused. "The only thing worth celebrating is that we learned something before someone was hurt even more." Another reporter raised her hand. "Will your company continue its reforms?" Benjamin answered immediately, "We've only just begun." Across the street, Emily Parker watched the interview from the edge of the crowd. She had recently accepted an invitation to join the company's newly created Customer Experience Advisory Council. Not because she was famous, not because she was powerful, because she had chosen to speak when it mattered. She remembered sitting silently on that airplane. She never wanted to make that mistake again. Weeks passed. New training programs reached every employee. Anonymous reporting systems became easier to use. Managers were required to investigate patterns instead of isolated complaints. Customer service evaluations placed respect alongside safety as a core performance standard. Employees noticed the difference. Passengers noticed it even more. Captain Michael Turner later told a group of new pilots something he wished someone had told him years earlier. The fastest way to lose someone's trust is to assume you already know their story. That sentence became part of the company's leadership training. Benjamin never asked for it. He simply smiled when he heard. Because real change did not happen when people repeated his words. It happened when they began living them. Late one evening, Benjamin stood alone in the same hangar where the journey had begun. The aircraft looked exactly as it had on that unforgettable afternoon. Bright, quiet, ordinary. He rested one hand against the polished fuselage. The airplane had never been the story, neither had the wealth. The real story had always been about a choice. a choice every person makes every day, to judge someone before they speak, or to offer the simple respect that every human being deserves before anything else. 1 year later, the same aircraft stood inside the company's main hangar, polished and ready for another flight. Mechanics moved quietly beneath bright lights. Pilots reviewed flight plans. Flight attendants greeted one another with warm smiles before beginning their shifts. Nothing about the building looked extraordinary, yet almost everything inside it had changed. Benjamin Carter walked through the hangar without an escort. He wore the same simple navy jacket, the same worn briefcase, the same quiet smile. New employees passed him in the hallway. Some recognized him immediately. Others simply smiled and said good morning. He returned every greeting. That mattered more to him than any executive title. Near the entrance, a bronze plaque had been installed. It did not mention lawsuits. It did not mention wealth. It carried only one sentence: respect begins before introductions. Every employee walked past those words at the beginning of every shift. Emily Parker now served as Director of Customer Experience. She had accepted the position only after Benjamin made one promise: "I don't want you to tell people what happened." She had looked confused. "I want you to help make sure it never happens again." She had kept that promise. Every new employee attended workshops built around real conversations instead of lectures. Pilots, mechanics, receptionists, executives, and flight attendants trained together. They learned that professionalism was not measured only by technical skill. It was measured by the way people treated someone whose story they did not yet know. Captain Michael Turner had become one of the program's strongest instructors. He often began every session with the same words: "The most dangerous assumption in aviation is believing you already have all the facts." Then he smiled. That lesson applies on the ground too. The company hotline remained active. Complaints were investigated. Managers were held accountable. Employees who showed exceptional kindness were recognized just as publicly as those who achieved outstanding performance. The culture slowly changed because ordinary people chose to protect it every day. Rebecca Collins never returned to the airline. Months after the court case, she sent Benjamin a handwritten letter. There were no excuses, no arguments, only an apology. She admitted that losing her career had forced her to confront habits she had never questioned. She had begun volunteering at a local community center, speaking with young adults about the dangers of judging people by appearance. Benjamin never answered publicly. He quietly mailed a short note: "I hope your next chapter helps someone avoid your mistakes." That was all. He believed forgiveness did not erase consequences. It simply allowed people to build something better afterward. On the anniversary of the incident, the company announced the Carter Respect Initiative, a nationwide scholarship and leadership program supporting students pursuing careers in aviation, hospitality, and public service. The program rewarded academic achievement, but it also recognized empathy, integrity, and service to others. During the ceremony, reporters again surrounded Benjamin. One asked the question people had repeated for an entire year: "What is the greatest lesson from everything that happened?" Benjamin looked around the crowded hangar. Mechanics stood beside executives. Pilots stood beside cleaners. Interns stood beside board members. No one occupied a better place than anyone else. He smiled. "The day I was slapped was not the worst day." The crowd became silent. "The worst day would have been if we learned nothing from it." He paused. "Every person you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. Treat them with dignity before you know their name." The room filled with quiet applause. Not because he owned the company, because everyone understood the truth behind those words. As Benjamin watched another aircraft lift into the clear American sky, he realized the greatest victory had never been winning in court or proving who owned the jet. The greatest victory was building a place where fewer people would ever have to prove their worth again. If this story reminded you that respect costs nothing but can change everything, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more meaningful stories. And if you believe every person deserves dignity before judgment, leave these 3 words in the comments. Choose kindness always.